Colin, the idea for Safety Not Guaranteed came from a classified ad asking for a time travel buddy, which went viral and became an internet meme. Now, I know the guy who wrote that original ad has a little cameo in the movie. Why don't you tell me how you found him and how he compares to Mark Duplass's eccentric inventor character in the film?
They're not that similar as human beings. There's one thing that's consistent in that they both bring their own weapons wherever they go. That's a true story. But you know, he just wants to be prepared, and he is in the film. There's a moment when Aubrey Plaza's character is staking out the post office, waiting for Mark Duplass to show up, and the first guy that comes to the P.O. box, he has a gray beard and some glasses, and that's the original author.
The film's got a very down-to-earth feel as well, and I know you sent Mark Duplass off with a small digital camera to shoot some separate footage which you used in the film. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so it was actually supposed to be for the EPK, and it was never going to be used in the movie. And he had a day off. He was only with us for the first 2 weeks of the 4-week shoot, and so he was shooting pretty consistently. But there was one day where we had to get something, and so I sent him and one of our producers and a camera guy just to Kenneth's house, which really looks exactly the way it does in the movie. We found this old house that had moss like grown all over it. I just said, look, we just need a day of you just being Kenneth. Just be this guy. And I knew, you know, Mark has a set of skills where you can just give him that very simple direction and he'll bring you back a wealth of material. So he went and set up this whole, you know, obstacle course, and he gave interviews in various places. And we'd been cutting the film for a while, and I was just at my house and I was looking, I came upon all this footage and I cut together this little sequence that I felt, you know, could work if we just suggested that Aubrey was shooting him. And it ended up becoming like really this crucial tonal turning point in the movie. We put it right in the middle, and it's really where it goes from, you know, being kind of a madcap comedy to something a little bit more emotionally resonant. And then we use it again at the very end as the last thing you see is that. And you know, I feel like, you know, if I did anything right on this movie, it was knowing that I had really talented writers in these actors that were working for us, and I gave them all a lot of space and a lot of room to bring their own material to the characters. And it wasn't just with Mark, it really is with everybody.
You mentioned the house there, and it was very much like it appears in the film, and I believe it was also a little bit creepy in real life too. Why don't you give us a bit of an insight into why that was?
Yeah, where did you read all this stuff? You've got some deep background. That house, we weren't going to use it initially. We had another location, and I kept driving by that house on the way to this other location that we were shooting, and I kept seeing it and feeling like that's Kenneth's house. We got to go there. So we just walked up and knocked on the door, and it turned out that the guy who owned this property had grown up here, and he lived elsewhere on the property, and this was his mother's home, his childhood home, and he had pretty much left it untouched since his mother died. And the upstairs, we weren't even allowed to go upstairs, and we heard that everything was like pristine up there, and so there was like locks on the door, and it really, like, the earth had kind of grown up around it, so there's just like ferns growing off the roof, and it looks like one of these things that, you know, we spent $100,000 trying to make a house look like this, and we spent $0. And just like that truck, which was in kind of the same area of Washington, that was in the location that we were shooting the ending at, and we just stumbled on this truck that looks exactly the way it does in the movie. And again, you know, $50,000 to make something look that old and weathered. And that was one of the great things about shooting in Washington State. I feel like, you know, in the 90s, when everything in America got new again and they built all these malls and they fixed up everything, like, Washington just stayed looking like the 80s, and they kept all the old neon signs, and it has this character to it that much of America has lost. And I really wanted to keep that character.
Another thing that has a lot of character in the film is that very distinctive yellow Datsun car that Mark drives, and that gave you a few headaches during filming, didn't it?
It did. You know, we bought that Datsun for $800 off of Craigslist, and when you do that, you're definitely gonna have some malfunctions. And one of them was that it had a screwdriver starter, and so we put a push button starter in there, and we had guys that were trying to work on this thing and make it function. And unfortunately, when we were gonna shoot the big car chase, the slow motion car chase sequence, the car wouldn't start. And we had no choice because, you know, we're a low budget film. We weren't going to get to come back to that location. We just had to push it. and make it seem as if it were moving. So, and we have footage of it actually, where you see the interior of this thing, and it looks like he's driving this car, and then the outside you've got this big bar and like 8 guys pushing this thing as quickly as possible. But that was actually like, that invigorated me. That day I think was my favorite day of shooting, because it was just this moment where no one could figure out how we were possibly going to make it work, and I had to go into the corner and I drew. It was like I was a kid with like the bottle caps, and like then the car's going to move here, and then okay, you're the Twinkie, you're going to go over here, and it was just so fun. I loved it.
After this gem of a movie you've made with Safety Not Guaranteed, you're going on to something with a little bit of a bigger budget. You're moving on to Disney's The Flight of the Navigator. Now, is that going to be a straight remake or a sequel or something similar to what happened with Tron and Tron Legacy?
Right. Well, it's not my next film. It's something that's going to take a while to build, and my next film's called Intelligent Life, and it's another indie. It's bigger in scope and definitely in budget than this last one, but I don't think it's possible to make it for less. But that one, and then we have another original that we wrote for Disney as well that we're excited about. But Navigator is one of those things that we got to get it right, and we're gonna probably go through many different iterations of how to tackle that, and it's something that it's an interesting dynamic because I care about it very much. It's something that I grew up really loving. Derek doesn't have the same connection to it, and I think that's actually part of what makes the dynamic work between us, because I'm going to have to convince him, like, this is why you care about this right now. And there's another project that he loves that will probably be the same way, where it's it's like dwarves and wizards and stuff I don't really care about, and I'm going to have to be like, why do I care about this wizard right now? Explain this to me. But you need that. And as far as how we're going to do it, I know we know what our themes are and we know what our characters are, and ultimately I feel like it just has to be something that really captures that same fear that first one did of what would happen if your family suddenly if you showed up and your parents are old and the world has moved on without you. And I think especially at that moment in life, to be a 12-year-old kid and you're just kind of coming into the point where everyone's changing around you, and especially if you're on the younger side of that and you've got all these kids who look 14 and you still look 11, there's sort of a feeling that the world is moving quicker than you are. And I think there's a lot of really resonant themes that are in that movie that I think we can pull out. And as far as how we're going to do it, it'll be a while before we can say for sure.
And of course, there's been so much speculation, which you've recently quashed, about your involvement with the next Star Wars movie, Episode 7. But you have described yourself in the past as a Star Wars kid. So now that some of your next movies are with Disney, who recently bought Lucasfilm, how psyched would you be to be able to make a future Star Wars movie? Would you throw your hat in the ring for another Star Wars movie if that opportunity arose?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that, for me, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I think there's a lot of people who grew up when I grew up that, when given the opportunity to go into that universe, they would absolutely take it. And what I think is interesting about this whole thing, and talking to friends of mine who, when they heard that this was going to happen, like, it was almost like a religious thing. Like, it's really interesting to see like how much people care about this. And I think for people who were kids at that time, who were like 6 and 7, it's so informed our worldview in this. And I think that a lot of us are still trying to get our heads around, the idea that we get to go back there. And so now I look at it, only as a fan, and I know they're going to do an incredible job. And I think Michael Arndt is an unbelievably brilliant choice as a writer. And I feel like you're 85% of the way there with him. It's exciting.
So you definitely put your hand up for episode 8 or 9 if that happened.
I think that if what they're going to do, what it seems like they're doing is they're going to really delve deep into that universe, and it's very exciting. I personally feel that it's important that I take some steps. Like, I don't necessarily want to go from a $750,000 movie to a $1 billion franchise. I feel like when you grow up wanting to be a filmmaker, really your reward is that you get to make films that you care about and that are original, that are yours. And I feel like it's a gift right now that I can tell original stories, and I'm not really sure if I want to exchange that gift yet for something that I definitely would love in the future. But it's pretty exciting that I get to go and make another movie at all. I mean, whenever anyone asks me like what my dream project is, it's whatever the next movie I get to make is. That's the dream, just actually doing it.
And as a fan yourself, where would you like to see the series go? What would you like to see happen next?
All I am is a fan when it comes to that. I think that all of those movies are, speaking solely as a fan, I have no knowledge of anything. All of those movies are based on a fundamental, iconic dynamic, and the original films were about it was Oedipal, it was father and son, and the prequel trilogy was about master and apprentice. And so I'm really curious to know like what is the dynamic that's going to be the anchor of these new movies. But I think that's what's so amazing about what George Lucas created is it's just something that reaches way back to the very beginning of storytelling, and I know that all of them are very conscious of that.
And finally, there's a great line in Safety Not Guaranteed where Mark tells his potential time travel buddy, played by Aubrey Plaza, that she's not to do anything in the past that might change things in the future, like tell people to leave their Star Wars figures in the boxes so they'll be worth more. And what would you find difficult to resist changing if you could time travel?
I probably, just for my fear of like unraveling the entire universe, I would probably stick to really personal things, but not like, oh, I wouldn't have worn that to that 8th grade dance. I mean, like I'll let that stuff go, but just probably more, I might have been nicer to my dad on that day, or just ways that ideally, like, if you can go back and start, you get to play Monday morning quarterback on your life with a time machine, and you can just go back to little moments and just do some tweaks and sort of make yourself a better person in retrospect, which we probably, like, that's a privilege we probably shouldn't have, because, then we would have no self-control at all. We're like, no, I'll just go back and tweak this, but I'm going to do it first.
Exactly, like you only live once, except you only live twice.
Yeah, I got the time machine. It'll be fine.